through the rest of the Reagan and Daddy Bush era, you know, one crime bill after another. Clinton picks up the same baton and carries it, in many ways in response to the L.A. riots, and then when he's, you know, faces a Republican House and Senate, you know, he is trying to triangulate and pass legislation that will work. And so the Omnibus Crime Bill, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, all these things are like his way of moving legislation through.
But in the heyday, the economic heyday, particularly through Clinton's years, we went from prison expansion to a prison industrial complex. And I watched that in 10 short years happen.
I got to see and deal with the influx of population, the growth. And so the prison system went from, federal prison system went from like 22 prisons to 64 prisons. And then that's not including the private prisons. You know, there'd be like 5 people would get released this weekend, 5 people would come in. And that was pretty much the way it went for years and years and years. Well, suddenly, 2 people are getting arrested, getting out, and 20 people are coming in. What they call them chains, when they're bringing them in. Are just, I mean, it's just every day there's more and more people.
Gosh, back in 1992, I held a press conference as a sitting judge, a very unusual thing to do, to state my opinion, clear opinion, that what we were doing with regard to our nation's drug policy simply was not working. We are churning low-level drug offenders through the system for no good purpose, ruining numbers of people's lives, including the family members and everything that go with it, really leading the world in the incarceration of our people. And here, I assure you, we're #1 does not make me proud.
The media, which had for so long, like the New York Times and you know, Ted Koppel, turned against the criminal justice buildup in the late 90s. They had supported it in the late 80s. 10 years earlier, they had been essentially riding shotgun with Rudy Giuliani, you know, promoting the specter of the crack epidemic and the need to repress it with no matter what the cost at every level. And 10 years later, there really was an elite rethink. There was, you know, Ted Koppel did a series of really great documentaries about the overuse of incarceration. And the New York Times and other papers started editorializing against this stuff, whereas they had supported it earlier. But what interrupted all of that was 9/11.
The war on terror created a whole nother group of incarcerated individuals. The crackdown on immigration has caused a lot of but still in the federal system, over 50% are nonviolent drug offenders.
That third phase, I think, is purely political. If the first phase is about counterinsurgency, about repressing mass movements, the second phase is about managing the class, racial, and geographic polarization of the society and explaining away the inequality by blaming the victims and saying, oh, well, people in these neighborhoods are essentially just bad and need to have the cops sicked on them. The third phase is purely political in that it is about politicians posturing and not in any way serving the actual political economic needs of the system. So, in other words, I don't think American capitalism needs 2 million people in prison right now, but it has 2 million people in prison. And it has a political situation in which no politician can really reasonably argue against that without fearing that they might be called out as being weak.